Hi, good evening, guys. Tonight we are going to be talking about Woodrow Wilson and Wilson's new freedom. So our next president in line, the progressive era after Roosevelt and Taft. So our learning target for tonight, I can explain the impact Woodrow Wilson had as a progressive president. So we're going to be looking at Wilson as a progressive president and the immense impact that he had as a progressive. Between him and Roosevelt, they really got a ton done in order to help balance out the society and big business. So it was huge what he did. So Wilson versus big business. Wilson's goal was to take things one step further than Roosevelt did. So where Roosevelt kind of wanted to regulate trust and only break up the bad trust, Wilson wanted to eliminate all trust. And he wanted to shrink down big business. He wanted to make sure that businesses were small and that businesses were forced to compete. Because again, when businesses compete, consumers win. And that's the goal here, is helping consumers win. So the first big breakthrough he had was something known as the Clayton Antitrust Act. Okay, and with the Clayton Antitrust Act, his goal was to once and for all level the playing field between citizens and big business. Because his thought process is without government intervention, there could be no fair practices as far as business goes. So his thought process is the government has to be involved in order to level the playing field between individuals and powerful businesses. And his goal was to strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act. Remember, we talked about the Sherman Antitrust Act a little bit, but the end result of the Sherman Antitrust Act was that it was not very powerful. And in fact, big business was using the Sherman Antitrust Act to eliminate labor unions, because they said that labor unions were monopolies and the courts back then were buying it. Well, that's not the case now. There were many things the Clayton Antitrust Act did that Sherman did not. The first thing that it did was that it defined what a trust was. And although it doesn't seem all that important, this was huge, because now things become a lot more black and white. You can look at a corporation, you can tell whether or not that is a trust or it is not a trust. And Sherman did not do that, so it made it very, very gray, which made it very, very difficult to enforce. The next thing that the Clayton Antitrust Act did was that it specified that labor unions were not trusts. And it also allowed labor unions to fight for their rights without fear of losing their jobs permanently. Okay, so it really strengthened labor unions. Okay, so it allowed labor unions to fight versus big business. And what it also did was it established, or it led to the establishment of something known as the Federal Trade Commission. And the Federal Trade Commission was basically just a watchdog organization. Okay, it was a watchdog group that oversaw businesses. And it made sure that businesses were not forming as trusts. And if it was found that those businesses were acting as trusts, then the Federal Trade Commission would basically tell those corporations to stop what you're doing. What you're doing is illegal. If you continue, then you will no longer be allowed to operate as a business in our economy. So again, we are regulating business, which is something that we have never done before until we get to the progressive era. Now also in place is this idea of tariffs, and what do tariffs have to do with competition? What do tariffs have to do with big business? So Wilson's stance on tariffs is that tariffs are bad. Okay, tariffs are bad. And the reason he says that is because what tariffs do is they eliminate competition. So by lowering tariffs, we then increase competition. And if we increase competition, then we lower prices. Okay, so again, by lowering tariffs, we create more competition. By creating more competition, we lower prices, which again is fantastic for the consumer. So the problem is how do we make up the money that we lost as a government by collecting tariffs? And the answer to that was to create an income tax. And all an income tax is it's just a tax on your income. Sounds pretty simple. You get a paycheck, the government takes a certain amount out of that paycheck. And at first, that income tax was very, very moderate. So it started out that unless you made more than $4,000 in a year, you would not be taxed at all. And it had it so a lot of factory workers and farmers were exempt from this income tax. Also having to do with the income tax is that the income tax was a gradual income tax. And so what that means is that the more money that you make, the more money that you have to pay in taxes. Okay, and it is still that way today. Now there's some debate over that as far as a tax cut for the rich. That's what the Republicans want. The Democrats do not want that. We can talk about that more next week when I get back. But for right now, what we do know is that we have a gradual income tax where the more you make, the higher percentage that you are taxed. Now, the last thing that Wilson was responsible for, and arguably one of his biggest accomplishments, was the creation of the Federal Reserve System. So I want you to think back to that time in the jungle when everybody was freaking out at the bank, and there was that super, super long line because everyone thought that the bank was shutting down and they wanted to get all of their money out. As a response to situations like that, because those situations did happen, Wilson creates the Federal Reserve System. And in the Federal Reserve System, what happens is you have kind of the federal government. Sorry, there was an announcement, so I had to pause it. So in the Federal Reserve System, what happens is you have the government kind of overseeing all banks. And as a result of this, if a bank gets in trouble and there is a chance that the bank could possibly run out of money, the Federal Reserve could transfer money over to these banks. And what does that do? It ensures us that, A, banks are going to keep money, and it also allows people to think a lot more easily as far as putting their money in, because it saves that money and it guarantees that we are protecting the savings of customers, which was huge. This put a lot of faith into the banking system, and as a result of that, a lot more people went to the banks, and a lot more people put their money into the bank. So this was a huge thing, and this is still in effect today, okay, and very, very, very effective. So that's it for today. Again, if you were able to describe the impact that Wilson had on the progressive movement, you were good to go. If you can compare, I guess I should also say, and contrast how Wilson and Roosevelt are in the progressive movement, you should be good. They mostly compare, but there are a few things that they do contrast about, and that was the start of the PowerPoint. Then you should be good to go. Make sure that you guys study the progressive movement for your Writing Wednesday. Okay, so study this on Tuesday night. If you can study this on Tuesday night, you should be good. Also, that how to write a thesis statement, how to get an A on a paper, that is also on the website. Make sure you guys check that out if you want to on Tuesday as well. Hope you guys have a fantastic week. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you on Monday.